Welcome to Sober Talk. I'm Dennis and I have lived experience of alcohol. If you or anyone you know is struggling with alcohol, please call Alcoholics Anonymous on 1300 222222 or check out their website on aa.org.au. I'll just run through the preamble of Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength and hope with each other. They must solve their common problems and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organisation or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses or opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics achieve sobriety.
Yeah, hi, I'm Matt. I'm an alcoholic. I just want to start by reading a bit from page 8 of the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. In Bill's story, it says in the second paragraph down, "No words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master." And that sums up step 1 for me. That sums up my journey with alcohol. I eventually came to a place, after many years of trying to control and enjoy my drinking, I eventually came to a place of rock bottom where I knew it was the end, where I knew that I couldn't continue to drink. Doctors were telling me I was going to die in my early 30s, and I couldn't imagine life without alcohol. It was too painful, and the pain and suffering of just being me and being sober was too much and too much to take. I originally came to Alcoholics Anonymous in my early 20s, and I came into a meeting, and at the time I was just going just to make it look like I was making an effort to stop drinking, but I had no real intention to stop. And I went to a meeting and I heard a bunch of old guys saying that they'd lost the missus and lost the kids and lost the license and been arrested and all this sort of stuff, and it was all a bit doom and gloom. I saw God on the walls and I didn't want to have anything to do with him. I was a fierce atheist when I came here, and I was sure that none of that stuff all of those old guys said would ever happen to me. And I left a meeting after about 10 or 12 minutes and I thought I'll do it my way. And I continued to drink for another 6 or 7 years. Things gradually became a lot worse. And I eventually lost the missus and lost the kids and lost the license and lost the house and racked up an enormous amount of debt, and eventually came to a place where I was at the jumping off place where I was ready to take my own life. I was suicidal, homicidal, and I just could not stop drinking. And I came back to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and this meeting was a little bit different. And at the end of the first meeting, a really nice guy came and approached me, and we had a bit of a chat. And he said to me, has anyone drawn you step 1? And I said, no. And he said, have you heard of William D. Silkworth? And I said, no. And he said, have you heard of the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous? And I said, no. And he said, have you got 30 seconds? And I said, oh. And I said, yeah, okay. And I really didn't want to listen. I knew that I still had a couple of dollars to my name in silver change in my car, and there was a bottle shop around the corner. So I knew that if I could just get out of there, I could get to the bottle shop before it shuts and just get another beer or hopefully 2, and that would wash away all the pain and suffering of being me. And this man got a sheet of paper, and on this sheet of paper he drew the step 1 cycle from the doctor's opinion. And that for me, that step 1 cycle for me is really had been my life for the last 10 years. I stopped drinking and I become restless, irritable, discontented, which just means I can't sit still. I'm not comfortable in my own skin. Everything everyone does bothers me and annoys me, frustrates me, irritates me. As I said, I was suicidal, but I was homicidal here. I just hated everyone in my life. I was always on edge. I just couldn't smell the roses, if you like. People would say, slow down and just relax. And I always had to do something to keep busy, anything to try and keep my mind preoccupied. Because when I was left, when you left me with me, I'm left with my worst enemy. I'm left with this uncontrollable head, this mind that never stops. And I was horribly depressed. I saw marriage counsellors and social workers. I went on mental health plans. I'd get to the end of a mental health plan and the doctor would say, the psychologist would say, well, Matt, what do you want to do now? And I'd say, well, drink. because I knew that drinking was the real solution. It gave me a solution to the problem, and I later found out that drinking was never my problem. It was my solution, that the real problem was the internal unrest inside, the disease of alcoholism. So I'm restless, irritable, and discontented, and then I engage in a thought process where I say, will I, won't I, should I, shouldn't I, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, and I engage in this mental obsession where I tell myself, this time it will be different. And even though I'd sworn off drinking for however long, this time will be different. This time I'll just have one, I'll just have two, I'll just drink beer, I'll just drink wine. I'll just drink at the staff show, I'll just drink before the staff show, I'll just drink weeknights, I'll just drink weekends, I'll just drink live beer, I'll just do this, I'll just do that. And I go through this entire thought process, and I eventually convince myself that this time will be different. And I say this time will be different, I'll just have one, I'll just have two, and based on that belief, I pick up a drink. And I succumb to the desire. What happens is I pick up a drink and I trigger an abnormal reaction to alcohol, a physical allergy. When most people drink, it slows them down, they start to feel it, and they go, better stop, I can feel it. I start to drink, I physically crave more liquor. I'm thirstier after 4 drinks than I was after 2. I want to drink more at the end of the night than I wanted to drink at the start of the night. So even though I tell myself I'm just going to have one, I'm just going to have 2, or just drink beer, or just drink wine, I get a couple of drinks in, all of a sudden, all of those rules, all of the exceptions, all of the plans go out the window, all bets are off, and I'm going for gold. And I say, well, what's the point? I started drinking, I'll try harder tomorrow. I may as well just write myself off and do a good and proper job since I've started. And I do. And I go on a binge, a bender, a spree, whatever you want to call it. And I go until I drink, until I pass out, black out. I go until I hit another mini rock bottom, whatever it is, and it might last a night, might last 2 nights, 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, and I just go on these benders. And it's always the same. I come out of these benders emerging remorseful with a firm resolution never to drink again. And I think, what the hell is wrong with me? Why did I drink? And I hit a new rock bottom and I say that, this time it's going to be different. This time I'll never ever drink again. And I make a firm resolution. I say, I will never ever drink again. And I'm back at the top. I'm back where I'm started. I'm back restless, irritable and discontented. And I got up one morning, about 8 o'clock in the morning, I was going off to work and I've been fighting with my partner. And she looked me dead in the eyes and she goes, I'm sick of your drinking. I was hungover and I was sick of my drinking. And she said, Matt, if you ever drink, you will never see these kids again. And I mean it. And I said, babe, I love you. I said, I'm done. I'll never ever drink again. And I meant it. And I went off to work and I said, I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to drink. And I promised myself that I wasn't going to drink. And I meant it. I had a firm resolution never to drink again. And I got to work. I thought I could do it on willpower alone. And I got to work and my boss criticized me. And I'm an alcoholic, so I feel that stuff so deeply. And he probably just told me the truth. But, my whole head just starts spinning and I think, I can't believe, how dare he say that to me? Next time he says that, I'll say this, and then he'll say that, and then I'll say this, and then I'll get him. And I'm going through this whole thought process. My mind is spinning. I'm overwhelmed with the resentment, overwhelmed with all this fear, overwhelmed with all the guilt and shame from all the harm I've done. I marinate in self-pity, and I said to myself, I'm going to get him. And I was just in so much resentment. And at 5 o'clock that afternoon, a bloke says to me, Matty, you having a beer? And I said, yes, but just one. And I can't bring into my mind with sufficient force the pain, suffering, humiliation of a week or a month ago. In the end, I couldn't even bring it in at 5 o'clock. I couldn't bring it in from 8 o'clock that morning when I said to my partner, I will never ever drink again. On the custody of my children, on the basis of seeing my children again, I couldn't bring into my mind I had promised not to drink. I had no defense against the first drink. I was powerless over alcohol. And I had that first drink. It went so well. I had the second and the third. And of course, triggered the allergy, the abnormal reaction to alcohol. And I went in the door that night, 9 or 10 o'clock at night, drunk. And I'll just never ever forget the look on her face. And she just looked at me in complete disbelief. She looked at me like, what the hell is wrong with you? And I dropped my head in my hands and I remember just looking in the mirror thinking, what the hell is wrong with me? And I didn't know. And it's a frightening place to be when you're an alcoholic and you don't know. Because I see other people drinking with impunity, drinking with no drama. I see other people have 1 or 2 or stop. I see the heavy and hard drinkers, they go and get drunk on the weekends. Their missus says, hey, tone it down. And they stop drinking for a while and they're fine. And then there's me. I've lost 9 jobs. I've crashed multiple cars. I've lost my license. Racked up insurmountable amounts of debt, owe everyone money, got nothing to my name. And on the basis of seeing my children, I still couldn't bring that into my mind. The only thing I could think was this time would be different. different. This time I'll just have one. This time I'll just have two. I had a complete inability to differentiate the true from the false. My alcoholic life had become my only normal one. It became my life. And I swear, if you put me on a lie detector test before my last bust and you'd say, Matty, the last 5,000 times you drank, you got drunk. Do you seriously think this time it'll be different? I would have said to you, yes. I seriously believe this time I can just have one, because I'd be telling you the truth, because that's what I believe to be true. I'd lost my mind in relation to drink. So at the end of this first meeting back, this guy drew me step one, stage by stage by stage. And I said, that's me, that's me, that's me, that's me. And I said, that's me. And he said, if you identify with this, you may be suffering an illness from only which a spiritual experience will conquer. And I thought, far out. Here we go. Finally, I've seen the doctors, the mental health plans, the psychologists, the marriage counsellors, the social workers. I've flown to Melbourne. I've seen Tony Robbins. I've sat in the front row, taken all these notes. And finally, I find someone that has the answer. Finally, I find someone that I've come to believe in that understands the disease of alcoholism. And now I've got to see Moses part the Red Sea or the Dead Sea. Now I've got to see the clouds part. And I didn't have any belief or faith. I had no faith and no belief in anything or anyone other than alcohol. But I did believe in this man, and I said, thank you for your help. And I went on my way, and I came to believe in AA, and I started to attend meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. And then I drank again, and I thought, what do I do now? And then someone said to me, you've got to do meetings. And I did meeting after meeting after meeting, and then I drank again. And I remember what this guy said. He said, if you're suffering, if you identify with this, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. And I knew what I had to do for myself, and I went back to that man and I asked for help, and I said, will you sponsor me? And he said, are you willing to go to any lengths? And I said, yes. And he invited me over to his house, and we started to go through the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, and we started to go through the steps. And I came to believe in him before I came to believe in a higher power, which I choose to call God. And he basically explained to me the spiritual experience is not so much Moses parting the Red Sea or the Dead Sea, but it's to have a personality change where I go from self-centered to God-centered, or from fear-based to faith-based, if you like. And as we got up to step 3, he said to me, now we get down on our knees and we say a prayer. And this is where we take step 3, where we make a decision to turn our will, which is our thinking, and our life, which is our actions, over to the care of God. And I said, I'm not doing that. I'm not getting down on my knees. And very calmly and very kindly, he looked at me and he said, no worries at all. Well, thanks for coming over. And he pointed to the front door, and just a great wave came over me. And I knew that if I went out that door, I would surely drink, and to drink was to die. And I knew that it was AA or Amen, and that I had to follow the directions of this man or I was going to die. And I realized that all of my thinking and all of my actions caused me to lose absolutely everything in life and to be at the jumping off place in my late 20s, ready to take my own life. And I made the decision right there, right then, at his kitchen table. I made the decision to go through with the rest of the program. And I remember saying to myself, no matter what this guy says, just do it. It's this way or it's the end. And that was the beginning of a process for me of beginning to practice the opposite and beginning to take direction from other people and beginning to have a faith and a power greater than myself. And I got down on my knees and I said the step 3 prayer, and I made the decision to turn, as I said, to turn my will, which is my thinking, and my life, which is my actions, over to the care of God. And I understand now I was starting the process of replacing that relationship with alcohol with a relationship with a higher power. And at once after that, I began on step 4, and I had to look at all of the resentments. I hated absolutely everyone in my life, and it was a running joke in my family. I would whinge and complain and hate on everyone in my life and everyone that I met. And my sister had this joke with my family, and she would say, Matt, you know who you like? And everyone else in the family would yell at the same time, no one. And then she'd say, you know who you don't like? And everyone in the family would yell at the same time, everyone. And it was a running joke because I had so many deep resentments towards everyone. I had so much anger. You know, I'm a white man living in Australia. I have everything to live for, but I was so bitter and so angry. I had no relationship with anyone. I hated everyone, and I suffered that unbelievable loneliness that only alcoholics understand. And I came to realize if I needed to be inwardly rearranged, as this program says, how could I do that without looking within? So I started the resentments. I started to sit down, as the process talks about in the book, and I went through every single name on my phone, every person I'd ever worked with, been to school with, come in contact with, every friend on Facebook, everyone I followed on Instagram, absolutely everyone. And I went through every resentment that came to my mind. I honestly think it's the only thing I've ever done properly in my entire life. And I went through that resentment process, and I was shocked. First of all, shocked to realize how selfish, dishonest, self-seeking and afraid I was. but shocked to realise how innocent almost everyone was on my resentment list. I had a resentment towards my best friend. I rang him one day and he didn't answer. And I sent him a message and I said, hey, do you want to go for dinner? You want to go to the pub tonight for dinner? And he didn't reply. And then 2 hours passed and I sent him a question mark and he didn't reply to that. And now I'm getting really angry and really resentful and I'm hating on him. And I think, what's he doing? And this is my best friend. So another hour passes and now I send 3 question marks. And I'm thinking, yeah, well, now he'll reply. And then another 2 hours passed. It gets to dinner time and he hasn't replied. I am absolutely fuming. And I think, who does he think he is? So I send 6 question marks. And then this time he doesn't reply. Another 20 minutes goes past. And I just explode. And I ring him up and leave a voicemail. And I say, who do you think you are? And go absolutely berserk. Just have this complete meltdown, complete emotional breakdown, going berserk, leaving him this voicemail, swearing and going crazy. And of course, the next day he rings me back and said he left his phone at work or he left it in the roof or whatever it was. And I had to look at it. And I'm going through this resentment thinking, what happened here? Because I fully believed that he was in the wrong, that I was in the right, that everyone had done everything to me. And I'd been a victim my whole life. And I started to look at the resentment on paper. And I said, resent my best mate, didn't answer the phone. And I saw that it was selfish of me to be dependent on my relationship with him to answer the phone so I feel good for my own self-esteem and pride. And I saw that it was dishonest to God, the act of telling and believing lies, because I believed he wasn't answering his phone to upset me or to annoy me or to reject me or frustrate me, and he wasn't. He was busy. And it was self-seeking. I was seeking him to answer the phone so I felt okay. And I was afraid. What was my fear behind that resentment? I came to understand that rejection was the fear behind that resentment. And I came to realise that there was fear behind every resentment. And that fear is the fuel of this whole disease. And I'd been afraid my entire life. And I'd been on, as I said, mental health plans. I'd seen psychologists and marriage counsellors and social workers. And I came to realise when we're talking to these people, we're only telling them what we already know. But if I need to be inwardly rearranged to have this personality change in order to get sober, in order to break that step 1 cycle that Dr. Silkworth talks about. He treated 40,000 to 50,000 alcoholics and drug addicts, and he said, this is what separates the heavy and hard drinker, the binge drinker. This is what separates them from the hopeless alcoholic. The alcoholic that Carl Jung says is completely doomed unless they have this complete psychic change. And I came to see that the only way to get free with that, the only way to be inwardly rearranged was to start looking within. I went through all of my fears, all of my harms, and I got them all down on paper and I sat down with my sponsor and, I was ready for step 5 and I was not ready for step 5. And, I sat there and I was so paranoid. I thought, I can't tell him this stuff. If I tell him, the FBI is going to drop from the roof. I'm going to be arrested. I'd stolen so much money. I'd done so much dishonest stuff. I'd done so much dangerous stuff. And I thought if I tell him, all this stuff's going to happen. And some of the stuff I'd done, I wasn't even drunk. What do you do then when some of the worst stuff you've ever done is sober and you haven't got that curtain of alcohol to hide behind? You're exposed for what you really are. And I sat there and I went through it all and I told my sponsor everything. And for the first time in my life, I'd been completely honest with someone. And I told him everything, and very calmly and very kindly, he looked at me and he said, those sound like the actions of a sick man. And he sat there with no judgment. And at the end of step 3, he dropped all his worst items of stock with me. He looked me dead in the eye, not from a place of ego, not from a place of bragging, but he told me absolutely everything he'd done, his worst items in stock, and that just filled me with so much trust and confidence in him because he'd shared with me. So when it came to step 5 and I told him everything, I was ready to take that leap of faith. And after telling him everything, it is the freest and the cleanest I'd ever felt in my entire life. And I remember driving home just being lit up like a Christmas tree. The same feeling I had when I was drunk, but this time I was sober. This time I was clean, I was free, and it felt like no matter what I'd done, anyone could say, we know what you did, and I could look the world in the eye and say, yeah, I did that, but I'm getting better now. And I was, and I came to see that I was never a weak man that needed to be strong or a bad man that needed to be good. I was a sick man that needed to get well. And I started to use this process, and I continue to use this process to this day, where I continually look at the things that are blocking me, the thoughts and the actions within me that are blocking me from the sunlight of the Spirit, the things that are making my spirit sick. And I came to understand later on that humility is proper personal perspective. And even after going through all of that process, I still had no intention or no desire to make any amends to anyone. But as I did the inventory process, I then did a step 8 list with my sponsor. I looked at all the persons, all of the people that I had harmed, and I started to categorize them in different lists. And I made an amends list, and I thought, well, it's done now. I've done the list. That's all I need to do. I'll get to the amends later on. And my sponsor said, what can you do now? And I really wanted inner peace. That feeling after completing the 5th step was the most peaceful I'd ever felt in my entire life. And I thought, I want that sense of peace within me. And if I want inner peace, how can I expect inner peace if I'm not willing to be the peacemaker? And as many people know, a couple of years into sobriety, my ex-partner, the mother of my children, lost her license for drink driving. And she sent me a text one night, and I woke up in the morning, and she doesn't usually drink. She'd only had a couple, but it was enough to be over, and she lost her license. And she sent me a text, and it said, I've lost my license for 6 months. And I started to smile from ear to ear, and I thought, this is great. This is the best thing that's ever happened to me. And I started to realise that God is finally doing for me what I can't do for myself. And I remembered all the times I'd lost my licence for drink driving, and I started to write down all of the things I could say to her. And I said, I'll say this and I'll say that. And I got so excited. And, you know, I looked at this list, and as it says in the big book, the spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. And I thought, this is, you know, not the actions of a man trying to live an honest life along spiritual principles. So I tore up the list, and I started to ask God in my inventory process, and you know, started to ask for direction in meditation. And I said, what should I do? And the thought came to me, I work in sales, and the thought came to me that I could drive her for 6 months. And I thought, I can't do that. She'll think I'm soft. How embarrassing. You know, I can't be in a car with her. We'll end up killing each other. It'll just be conflict. And I thought, well, what are you going to do? She's going to get taxis, you know, the financial cost of that. What about the kids? You know, there's not going to be any money. You know, and I started to think all these things. And for the first time in my life, I didn't think about getting revenge. I didn't think about me. I thought about her, and I thought about the kids. And I drove over, and I said to her face to face, I said, listen, I'm sorry you lost your license for drink driving. And I didn't mention any of the times that I lost my drink driving. I didn't mention any of the things she said to me. I just looked her dead in the eyes, and I said, you know, you're not a calculator. You're allowed to make mistakes. We all make mistakes. I'll drive you for the next 6 months. I said, I'll take you to work every day. I'll drop you off. I'll pick you up. I'll get the kids, take the kids to school every morning, pick them up every afternoon, take them to sport. I'll take you to Woolworths, take you shopping. I'll drive you for the 6 months. It's no drama. And she looked me dead in the eye and in complete shock. And she said, have you had a stroke? And I said, no. I said, there's no games here. There's no drama. I just want to clean up the mess. I just want to clean up the wreckage of my past. And I said, I'll be willing to do that if you let me. And she said yes. And for the first month, it was the hardest month of my life. You know, I really didn't enjoy it. And it was really hard. And we used to fight every single day, you know, phone calls back and forth, emails, lawyers involved, custody arrangements, abusive messages and text messages and phone calls and email, all the stuff that comes with the separation. And, you know, about 6 weeks in, 7 weeks in, whatever it was, I'm walking my daughter into the classroom, and my daughter turns to one of her friends and she goes, guess what? And her friend goes, what? And she goes, guess who's picking me up from school today? And the girl said, your mum or your dad? And she goes, no, both of them. And all of her friends jumped in, and all of her friends started hugging her. It was like she'd won the lottery. She was so happy. And, you know, I thought I would have robbed that child of that moment of pure love. I would have robbed her of that because of my pride and my ego and all of the stuff that's blocking me. And I continued to drive her for the whole 6 months. And a couple of months in, she just got in the car one day and she just handed me a coffee. And I said, what's this? And she's like, oh, I got you a coffee. And I said, oh, thanks. And she handed me the coffee, and it was the beginning of the end of our toxic relationship, of all of the pain, the suffering, the drama, the abusive text messages and phone calls and emails. And, you know, from that day to this, we've obviously had another fight or two, but we have practically not had a fight, you know, whilst we've had one or two in the 5 years since. You know, it's been a peaceful journey. We're the best of friends today, and the best compliment I ever got, she was over one time with the kids, and my neighbour, she said to me, she goes, Matt, you know, you and Robbie and the kids, you got a better family unit than most families are together. And that is the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. And I owe that to the amends process in step 9, and I owe that to step 10, 11 of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, and I continue to inventory on a regular basis. I need to use this program as a way to self-regulate, so I don't need to turn to things to self-medicate, which is what I used to in the drink or use other things, in early sobriety, basically. Use anything to relieve me of the pain and suffering and being sober. It was like I'd give the firing squad a different weapon and say, kill me slowly with this one. And I continue to meditate. It's a part of my daily routine, a part of my daily program. I love the analogy of, of an aeroplane. An aeroplane's off track 99% of the time, so am I. A pilot's job is just to continually bring the aeroplane back on track, and that's what I feel like I need to do in step 10, 11 on a regular basis. Is left to my own devices, I veer off track 99% of the time. So I need this program, I need these steps to bring me back on track and align my will with God's, and bring a bit of silence between the ears. And, obviously continue to attend regular meetings and carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous, practice these principles in all my affairs. And in closing, I didn't see Moses part the Red Sea or the Dead Sea. I didn't see the clouds separate and part in the sky. I went through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I slowly began to be aware and awake to things I'd been asleep to my whole life. And as a result of these steps, I had a spiritual experience, and that's why I practice these principles in all my affairs, and that's why I carry this message. I'll just finish on this. The journey from rock bottom to rocketed to the fourth dimension of existence has been the journey of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank you so much.
We have local meetings for the full week in the local area. Monday is Gala meeting at 8 o'clock. Tuesday is Elizabeth East at 8 o'clock. Wednesday is Elizabeth East at 8 o'clock. Thursday is Two Wells at 8 o'clock. And Friday is Salisbury at 8 o'clock. There's a meeting at Daveron Park at 12 o'clock. And on Sunday there's a meeting in Salisbury at 7 o'clock. And many other meetings in the area. For details of your local meetings, please phone 1300 22 22 22. And once again, if anyone you know is struggling with alcohol issues, please call Alcoholics Anonymous on 1300 22 22 22. The website is aaSouthAustralia.org.au.